"You're not invited to the wedding. Claire says you'll ruin the aesthetic." That one sentence shattered everything I spent a lifetime building. You don't always notice the moment love starts to fade, not when it's your own child. There's no slammed door, no harsh goodbye, just silence. A quiet forgetting that settles in like dust on an unused chair. That's how it began with Daniel. Not with a fight, but with a slow, aching drift. It started small missed phone calls, delayed replies. I told myself he was busy, that his job was demanding, that maybe I was overthinking. We always had a bond stronger than most, I thought. After all, it was just me and him since he was 2 years old. His father left before Daniel ever learned how to say dad. So I became everything: mother protector, cheerleader, nurse. I remember the winters in our little house by the coast in New England, how I'd warm his tiny boots by the heater before school so he wouldn't have to slip them on cold. On nights when his forehead burned with fever, I'd sit by his bed, whispering lullabies from my own childhood, spooning in soup between sobs. I worked 2 shifts at the diner down the hill. My hands cracked from dish soap, my feet swollen from hours on tile, but I always smiled when I walked through our front door and saw him asleep safe. I didn't live a grand life. I didn't take vacations or buy new coats for myself. Everything I had went into building his future. His dreams became my purpose. Every test he passed, every game he played, I was there front row, camera in hand, pride swelling in a body that had long forgotten what rest felt like. So, when that silence crept in, when weeks passed without a single, "Hey, Mom," I tried not to panic. I told myself boys grow up, they get distant, that's what everyone says, right? But deep down, something hollow stirred, not because I needed to be the center of his world, but because I used to be. And now I wasn't even orbiting it. No one ever warns you that being a good mother sometimes means becoming invisible. And even when you give everything, there's no promise you won't be forgotten. From the moment Daniel was placed in my arms, tiny and wide-eyed, everything shifted. He was just 2 when his father walked away, leaving behind nothing but an empty drawer and a trail of unfinished promises. I remember standing in the kitchen that day, Daniel's little hands wrapped around my leg, asking if Daddy would be back in time for his birthday. I didn't have the heart to answer, so I smiled, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "You've got me, baby. I'm not going anywhere." And I didn't. From that point forward, Daniel became my entire world. I built my life around him with the kind of devotion you can't measure in hours or paychecks or sleep lost. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was just a mother doing what mothers do when they love without condition. I stayed up late helping him glue foam planets to string for a 3rd-grade science project he got a C, but he smiled like it was a Nobel Prize. I remember the smell of hot glue and paper mache filling the kitchen, the 2 of us covered in glitter and ambition. When he joined the local soccer team, I was there at every game, rain or shine. He wasn't the star player. In fact, most of the time he sat on the bench. But I cheered anyway, louder than the parents of the starters. I brought orange slices, Band-Aids, and an embarrassing amount of cowbell. One of the coaches once asked if I was a professional cheerleader in a past life. I told him, no, just a mother who's really proud of her bench warmer. As he got older, the sacrifices changed shape. The nights got longer, the worries deeper. Teenage years have a way of stretching your heart and testing your patience. There were doors slammed, voices raised, but even in the worst of it, I never stopped showing up. I always said, no matter what you do, I'll still be your biggest fan. And I meant it. When he got accepted into college, a state university 2 hours away, I cried for 3 days. Not because I was sad, but because I was terrified. Who would make sure he ate something other than microwave burritos? Who would remind him to rest, to breathe, to not let the weight of expectation crush him? So I did what I knew how to do. I sent care packages. Every month, like clockwork, socks, snacks, notes scribbled in blue ink that said, "You've got this." I kept his phone bill paid, slipped extra money into his bank account during finals, and smiled every time he texted, even if it was just to ask, "Where's the peanut butter in the pantry again?" He never asked for help. But mothers know. We always know. After graduation, he moved back home for a while. I didn't mind. The house had felt too quiet without the slam of his bedroom door or the familiar creak of the stairs when he came in late. I started cooking his favorite meals again, chicken parm on Tuesdays, blueberry pancakes on Sundays. I even folded his laundry the way he liked it, shirts rolled, not folded flat. Then one evening he walked into the kitchen with a strange kind of energy, nervous, excited. He had met someone. Claire. She was beautiful, elegant in a way that made you want to fix your posture when she entered the room. She smelled like expensive perfume and had the kind of polite smile that didn't quite reach the eyes, but I didn't care. I was happy for him. The first time I met her, I wore a dress I hadn't put on in years. I remember standing in front of the mirror thinking, be charming, be the kind of mom she likes. I laughed at all the right moments, complimented her earrings, and made sure the table setting looked like something out of a wedding catalog. Weeks passed, then months. Their relationship deepened, and one night Daniel sat across from me at the kitchen table, his hands fidgeting with a fork. He said, "Mom, I'm thinking of proposing." His voice cracked a little on the last word. I asked if he had a ring. He looked away, said he found one, the perfect one, but that it was out of reach. I didn't ask for details. I just listened. And later that week, I did something he never found out about. I cashed in a small piece of my retirement fund, just enough. Walked into a downtown jeweler I'd passed 100 times, but never dared enter. I pointed to the ring Daniel had described platinum band vintage setting and told the man, "Wrap it carefully. Don't mention my name." It was the easiest hard decision I'd ever made. When she said yes, I watched their engagement unfold like something out of a dream. Candlelit photos, champagne flutes, captions filled with words like forever, and found my person. I liked every post, left hearts and clapping hands. Because that's what you do when you love someone. You give without asking. You show up without being asked. You invest in dreams you won't be part of. And you keep giving even when you start to wonder if they remember who made those dreams possible in the first place. I used to think love meant you'd always have a seat at the table, especially the one you helped build. But somewhere between the engagement photos and the save the date cards, I started to notice something shifting. It was subtle at first. Claire would mention things in passing, half-finished sentences about venues and color schemes like maybe I already knew. But I didn't. I hadn't been told anything. I hadn't been asked. The first time it truly hit me, I was standing in the kitchen, same spot I'd stood 100 times when Daniel walked in and casually said they'd booked the venue. I smiled and asked, "Which one did you choose?" He looked up from his phone and said, "Oh, it's this vineyard just outside the city. Claire found it. It's really small. Intimate. Intimate." That word sat heavy on my tongue. He changed the subject quickly, asked about dinner, about the cat, anything else. But I couldn't stop hearing it. Small, intimate, a venue for just the right people. Suddenly, I wasn't sure if I was still one of them. When I asked Claire later gently, casually, if she needed help with anything, she smiled tight-lipped and said, "Thanks, Eleanor. But we've got it covered," like I was offering too much, like my hands were too old for the details. Still, I tried. I offered to cover some floral arrangements. I asked if she wanted help looking at dresses, offered to drive her to that boutique downtown where she once admired the lace in the window. She paused and said, "Oh, I already scheduled fittings with the girls. It's kind of a bridesmaids thing." That word, girls, not moms, not family, just girls. I nodded, said I understood, and I did. I mean, it's her day, right? But something inside me tugged, that small hollow ache you try to ignore until it keeps you up at night. So I started pulling back just a little. I stopped offering ideas, stopped asking questions. I figured maybe I'd overstepped. Maybe I'd tried too hard. Maybe Claire needed room to breathe without my presence hovering like a cloud she didn't invite. I convinced myself that giving space would heal things, that if I stepped aside, I'd be welcome back in. But instead, the space just grew, and with it, the silence. Texts went unanswered for days. Phone calls ended quicker. Daniel sounded tired all the time, or maybe distracted. I asked about a family dinner, just something casual. He said they were swamped with planning, that Claire's parents were helping a lot, that everything was coming together. I remember sitting at my kitchen table that night, the same table where I once helped him with spelling homework, where we ate birthday cake and counted coins for field trips. I stared at my phone and scrolled through his social media, something I never used to do. There they were smiling at the venue. I hadn't seen tasting cakes. I didn't know they'd ordered clinking champagne glasses with people I didn't recognize. Every photo looked like a dream. Their dream. And I wasn't in it, not even in the background. That's when the questions started creeping in. Was I too involved, too opinionated, too present? Did I make her uncomfortable just by caring? I tried to find answers in old memories, replaying conversations, wondering if I missed a signal, if I'd overstepped some invisible line I didn't know existed. And you know the hardest part, I blamed myself. Because that's what mothers do. We don't ask, why are they hurting me? We ask, what did I do wrong? I thought maybe if I gave them more space, they'd come back. Maybe Claire would reach out with a dress photo. Or Daniel would ask me to help pick music like we used to when he was little. But days turned into weeks, and that invitation never came. Instead, what I got were vague text replies, conversations that ended before they began, and a growing sense that my presence had become a complication they were trying to manage, not a gift they were grateful for. One day while walking through the grocery store, I saw a mother and daughter picking out napkins, laughing over colors, matching tablecloths. I stopped and watched them longer than I should have. Not because I was envious of the napkins, but because I remembered when Daniel used to pull me into those little decisions, asking for advice on school dances or gifts for friends. Now I didn't even know what shade the bridesmaids' dresses were. When inclusion becomes a privilege, it starts to feel like a test you never signed up to take. And I was failing. At least that's how it felt. But deep down, something else was beginning to stir, not quite anger, not yet, but the first sparks of clarity. Because love should never feel like a performance, and family should never feel like something you have to reapply for. It was a rainy afternoon in early April, the kind of rain that comes down in thin sheets, soft but steady, more whisper than storm. I was carrying a stack of freshly folded towels down the hallway, humming a tune I didn't realize I remembered until it came out of me. The house was quiet, except for the rhythmic tick of the old wall clock in the hallway and the faint sound of Daniel and Claire talking behind the guest room door. I wasn't listening, not intentionally. The door wasn't fully shut, and I wasn't looking for anything. I was just passing by the way I'd done 1,000 times before. But then I heard it. Daniel's voice low, careful, almost sheepish. We'll just say the anniversary cruise was canceled. She's old. She won't even realize. 10 words. That's all it took. I stopped mid-step. The towels trembled slightly in my hands. For a moment I couldn't breathe. Not because of the words themselves, but because of how effortlessly they left his mouth. Like I wasn't a person, just a loose thread they were trying to snip quietly. An inconvenience dressed in memory. She's old. They thought I wouldn't hear. They thought I wouldn't know. But the thing about whispers is they echo. Long after the words have stopped, they keep ringing inside you. And in that moment, something broke. Not loudly, not like glass. No, this was quieter. A clean, precise crack, deep within, like a fault line shifting beneath ground you thought was solid. I backed away from the door, slowly, still holding the towels, as if they might anchor me to the floor. My heart didn't race. It did the opposite. It slowed, like it was trying to conserve its strength, like it knew it needed to hold me together. They laughed after that. Claire said something I couldn't make out, and then there was silence again. The kind that hums too loudly when you realize you've become invisible in your own home. That evening at dinner, Claire brought it up. The cruise. Said she got an email from the cruise line, some kind of glitch with the reservation, something about overbooking. I watched her closely. Her voice was too bright, her words too fast. She put the call on speaker and pretended to ask about dates she couldn't quite remember. The line dropped, or maybe she hung up. Then she smiled, tilted her head, and said, "Too bad. It would have been fun, huh?" I looked at Daniel. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just scooped another forkful of mashed potatoes into his mouth, like the silence between us didn't taste like betrayal. And I smiled back, not because I believed them, but because I wanted to see how far they'd go to keep up the lie. That's when I knew. It wasn't about a cruise. It was about erasure. It was easier to believe I was too old to notice than to face the truth that I noticed everything. Every missed call, every sidestepped question, every time I wasn't included in a photo, a plan, a moment. All those little slights that I'd brushed off for months suddenly fit together like puzzle pieces I hadn't wanted to look at. They weren't accidental. They were strategic, a quiet restructuring of their world, one where I no longer belonged, and the worst part, I waited. I waited for Daniel to come to me, to say something, anything, to admit it, apologize, to acknowledge the moment I wasn't meant to hear. But he didn't. Instead, they came out of that guest room laughing later that day, holding hands like nothing had happened, like they hadn't just waved away my presence with 10 casual words. That night, I stood in the kitchen doing the dishes. The sponge trembled in my hand. I couldn't stop hearing it. She's old. She won't even realize. But I did realize, and it changed everything. Not in some theatrical way. I didn't scream or confront them. There were no slamming doors or dramatic speeches. I just shifted. Inside, something began to cool. Not bitterness, not yet, but distance, like a curtain being drawn between two worlds, mine and theirs. They had already begun the process of writing me out. I had just finally caught up to the script. You spend your life giving everything to your child, your time, your energy, your dreams, and then one day you realize they've started building a life where you're no longer needed. Not because you failed them, but because you succeeded too well. You made them strong, independent, confident enough to forget you were ever their foundation. But no matter how quietly they try to fade you out, mothers remember. We always remember. And sometimes the most painful betrayals don't come from strangers or enemies. They come from the very people you taught how to love. I didn't think it could get worse than that whisper outside the guest room door. But it did. It was a Sunday morning, the kind that used to mean pancakes, coffee, and Daniel reading the newspaper aloud like a little anchor man. But now, Sundays were quiet. They stretched like long shadows across the floor, filled with nothing but the sound of my neighbor's lawnmower and the creak of my own thoughts. I was sitting at the kitchen table flipping through a magazine I'd already read twice. The words didn't register. I wasn't really reading. I was floating caught somewhere between memory and ache. And then my phone buzzed, just once. I reached for it like muscle memory. No matter what had happened lately, part of me still lit up at the sound of his name. But when I opened the message, my entire world stopped. "You're not invited to the wedding. Claire says you'll ruin the aesthetic." That was it. No greeting, no apology, not even a period at the end. Just a sentence, cold, transactional, like a receipt, like a return policy on my existence. I stared at the words for a long time, rereading them as if maybe autocorrect had twisted them into something cruel. That another message would follow, "Oops, sorry, wrong person," or "Just kidding, Mom." But nothing came, just that same hollow silence I'd been living in for months. My hand trembled as I placed the phone down. I remember the sound, the soft thud it made against the wood grain of the table. I remember the sharp pulse in my throat, the ache that bloomed behind my ribs, not like anger, but like something breaking and folding in on itself. Aesthetic. That word echoed louder than all the others, as if I was, what? A blemish, a bad backdrop, as if the years I gave up sleep money and dignity had rendered me too unsightly for a seat in the second row. That's when my eyes drifted to the closet at the end of the hall. There, tucked away carefully, was the wedding dress, the one Claire had twirled in at the boutique mirror, beaming like a child in a fairy tale. She had said, "This makes me feel timeless," and I had smiled, told her she looked radiant. When the clerk read the price aloud, Claire hesitated. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck and mumbled, "We'll figure it out." I stepped forward, quietly, slid my card across the counter. "Put it under my name," I said, "just in case, just in case." As if I knew even then that I'd need proof I once mattered in this story. And now I was being erased from it, like a smudge on glass, like an outdated photo that didn't match the color palette of their curated life. I sat back down at the table and stared out the window. The sun had broken through the rain, casting golden ribbons across the countertop, but I didn't feel the warmth. I felt foolish. Foolish for believing I still had a role to play in Daniel's next chapter. Foolish for thinking love was enough to keep me included. I had paid for the dress, the one thing Claire seemed to love more than anything else in the entire wedding, and yet I was the one ruining the aesthetic. Not because I said something wrong, not because I caused drama, but because I simply existed in a body that no longer fit the picture they were trying to paint. The ache wasn't just emotional, it was physical. It sat in my chest like a weight. A slow, aching reminder that I wasn't wanted, not even as a silent witness to the life I helped create. And then the deeper truth surfaced, clearer than ever before. I wasn't just excluded from a wedding. I had become a burden in a story I once carried on my back. The years I'd spent building Daniel's world brick by brick, breath by breath, had somehow turned me into an inconvenience, a wrinkle in the fabric of their celebration. And the hardest part, they didn't even try to hide it. They weren't sorry, they were just done. They thought I would quietly accept it, that I'd smile and nod and understand, that I'd be gracious in my rejection. But something in me, something long dormant, started to stir. Not anger, not revenge, something quieter, something stronger, clarity, because you can only be erased if you let them hold the pen. And I was beginning to remember who taught Daniel how to write in the first place. There's a moment after heartbreak when the grief cools. It doesn't disappear, it just changes. It stops screaming and starts simmering. You're still wounded, but you're no longer bleeding. That's where I was. Sitting in the same kitchen chair where Daniel used to color with crayons and ask me how clouds worked, now that chair felt like a memorial to something I couldn't quite name. The message on my phone still burned in my mind. You'll ruin the aesthetic. Not even a phone call, just a sentence, hollow and sharp. But I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way people expect. I wasn't plotting revenge or crying on the floor. Something quieter had taken root, something more dangerous than rage clarity. And in that clarity, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I walked down the hallway and opened the closet. There it was, the wedding dress, still folded, untouched, pristine, in its layers of ivory and illusion. I ran my fingers over the silk bodice, the one Claire twirled in front of the mirror, giggling, calling herself timeless. The one she gasped over when the clerk announced the price, and I quietly stepped in to pay for. Not because she asked, but because I wanted her to feel cherished, included, seen. And now? I wasn't even allowed to sit in the room where that dress would make its debut. It was strange standing there in that stillness, knowing that something I paid for with love had become a symbol of exclusion. But that's when it hit me. I may not be welcome at the wedding, but I could still leave something behind. Not to ruin anything, not to hurt them, but to be heard, to leave a truth no one could edit out. I went to my desk and pulled out my best stationery, cream-colored with gold trim, the kind I saved for handwritten thank you notes and birthday cards I never got responses to anymore. I sat with it for a while. The blank page stared back at me. And then I wrote, not a letter, not a plea, just a single truth. This gown was bought with love, but love isn't a costume. You can't wear what you haven't earned. That was it. I folded the paper once. No envelope, no signature, just paper and ink soaked in quiet dignity. Then I walked back to the closet, unwrapped the dress with care layer by layer, slipped the note beneath the bodice, pressing it gently against the silk, like a heartbeat, waiting to be discovered. I didn't sign the return address. I didn't use my handwriting on the shipping label. I paid in cash at the local mailing center and asked them to make it look polished, professional. I wanted it to blend in, to arrive like any other package, not because I was afraid to be found out, but because I wanted the mystery to linger. I wanted the silence in that bridal suite to stretch. I wanted Claire to wonder. I wanted Daniel to feel the weight of a truth too sharp to ignore. A whisper folded in silk, delivered not with fury, but with precision. I imagined it all. The morning of the wedding, the curling irons hissing, the champagne flutes clinking, the laughter of bridesmaids in matching robes posing for photos in soft window light, and then Claire opening the box, expecting lace and sparkle, instead finding something heavier, unexpected, honest, a message tucked beneath the layers of what was supposed to be perfect. I wasn't there in person, but in that room, in that moment, I was more present than they could have imagined, because that note, those 12 words, they carried more weight than any chair at the reception ever could. You see, there's a certain kind of power in quiet truth. It doesn't crash through doors. It waits. It lets the room go still, lets the words hang in the air like perfume. You don't need to raise your voice when your absence speaks louder than your presence ever could. That note was never meant to destroy. It was meant to remind, to say, I was here, I mattered, I loved, and I will not be erased. That's the thing they never understand about women like me. They think we'll fade quietly. They think silence means surrender. But sometimes silence is a message wrapped in silk. And sometimes the most unforgettable voice in the room is the one that never needed to speak at all. They thought the story ended when they sent the dress back. But stories, real stories, have a way of circling back, especially the ones written in truth. I wasn't there that morning. I wasn't invited. But I can picture it all. The bridal suite was likely filled with the sugary scent of setting spray and the gentle hiss of curling irons. Claire probably stood in front of a full-length mirror, her bridesmaids buzzing around her clinking champagne flutes, their silk robes catching the morning light. The box was placed carefully beside her white satin ribbon, still intact. She hadn't touched it since I returned it, until now. She untied the bow, peeled back the tissue paper, and saw at the dress. Still perfect, still glowing under the warm lights. But this time it wasn't alone. There it was, the note, folded, unassuming, tucked just beneath the bodice like a secret the dress had been holding on to. She opened it, and the room went still. A bridesmaid gasped. Another leaned in. Wait, what is that? Claire didn't answer. Her fingers trembled as she read it again. 12 words. This gown was bought with love. But love isn't a costume. You can't wear what you haven't earned. Her cheeks flushed, jaw tightened. She clenched the note in her fist. The chatter stopped. Someone silenced the music on their phone. One bridesmaid began texting under the table, because even in a room full of curated elegance, the truth when spoken plainly shifts everything. Claire stormed out of the sweet veil, trailing behind her like a flag of unraveling control. Down the hall, Daniel was adjusting his cufflinks, laughing with his best man, trying to ease the nerves. He didn't see her coming until she was in front of him, shoving the note into his chest. "Did your mother send this?" she demanded. He blinked, read the note. Once. Twice. His face went pale. I don't know what this is," he stammered. But the guilt was already etched across his face. Claire's voice rose not loud, but sharp enough to draw attention. A few guests turned. A groomsman quietly excused himself. The makeup artist looked away and began cleaning brushes that didn't need cleaning. "You said she was out of the picture," Claire snapped. "You said she wouldn't be a problem." He reached for her arm. She pulled away. "You lied," she hissed. He tried to calm her, tried to make a joke, but it didn't land, because the note had already done what it was meant to do. It told the truth, and once truth enters the room, there's no going back. Back at home, just 20 minutes away, I was curled up on the couch with a blanket and a cup of tea. The same movie Daniel used to watch when he was little played softly on the screen background noise for a day I wasn't supposed to witness. But I didn't need to be at the wedding to know what was happening. I could feel it. Truth has a way of showing up loud in its silence. It lingers in the way someone's hands shake when they hold a champagne glass, in the way a bride suddenly can't smile with both her eyes and her mouth, in the way a groom avoids the camera and laughs a little too hard at things that aren't funny. They thought the wedding would erase me. They thought curated playlists and rented florals could silence a lifetime of devotion. But I was there, in every stitch of that dress, in every thread they forgot to trace, in every uneasy glance exchanged when someone asked, "Where's the mother of the groom?" Later, when the photos surfaced online, I scrolled through them like everyone else. There was Claire smiling, but not really. Her posture rigid, her shoulders high. Daniel beside her leaning in just a little too far. His eyes unsure, his laugh forced. You can't filter that kind of tension. You can crop the corners, you can add soft light, but you can't edit body language. The comments started slow, then picked up. "She looks upset. Is everything okay? Why does he look like he's apologizing in every photo?" I didn't respond. Didn't need to. Because the truth had already done the talking. That wedding, for all its planned beauty, was no longer the fairy tale they scripted. It was something else. Real, complicated, fractured. And for once, I wasn't the one hiding behind a smile. They built a day without me, but I still found my way in. Not with drama, not with a scene. Just a whisper in silk, a message that said I was here. I saw, I remember. Because when love is true, it doesn't vanish. It leaves traces, even in the places it was asked not to enter. I didn't say a word after the wedding. No calls, no dramatic monologues, no cryptic texts. I just lived. There's a kind of power in staying quiet when the world expects you to react. When they lean in, waiting for the confrontation, the tears, the accusation, and instead you give them silence. Not because you're weak, but because you finally remembered your worth. Daniel never reached out, not then. And I didn't chase him. I had spent enough years auditioning for a place in a life I helped build. I was done chasing doors that kept closing. One afternoon, a week after the photos surfaced online, I sat at the kitchen table, the same place where his baby footprints once sat in a painted frame, and opened an old manila folder. My will. I hadn't looked at it in years. His name was everywhere. The house, the savings, my grandmother's wedding set, the journals I'd written for him since he was born. All of it. His. But as I scanned each line, I realized something painful and freeing. I had built my entire legacy around a person who no longer saw me. And I asked myself the hardest question a parent can ask. Why? Why do we keep handing love to people who treat it like a receipt? Why do we define inheritance by blood when blood no longer means belonging? That's when I picked up the phone. My lawyer, Helen, had known me for years. She didn't ask for explanations. She'd seen too many families unravel in her line of work. When I told her what I needed, she looked at me and said, "Are you sure?" And I smiled. I've never been more sure of anything. So we rewrote it all, line by line. And when we came to the section marked beneficiary, I paused for a moment and then wrote a new name, Marion, my neighbor, my quiet friend, the one who brought soup when I had the flu last winter, the one who dropped off cookies on Christmas morning when no one else came by, the one who never asked questions but always listened when I spoke. She was never family by definition, but she showed up. And in the end, that's all that matters. I walked home that day, lighter, like I'd finally set something down I didn't know I'd been carrying. And then I did something else, something I hadn't done in years. I signed up for therapy, not because I was broken, but because I wanted to understand why I kept giving to people who didn't see me. My therapist's office was warm and quiet with books lining the shelves and a chair that made you feel safe. She didn't interrupt, didn't try to fix me. She just listened, and for the first time in years, I felt heard, not because someone needed something from me, but simply because I existed. I cried in that first session not out of pain, but out of relief. Relief that I didn't have to explain away my worth anymore. A few weeks later, I joined a book circle at the local library. Mostly women, some younger than me, some older, some with children, some without. We talked about fiction, sure, but also about grief, about aging, about being invisible in a world that only celebrates youth and noise. And slowly, piece by piece, I started to feel like myself again. Not Daniel's mother, not the woman left off the wedding guest list, just Eleanor. And one day after book club, I walked past a boutique I'd never dared enter before. It always looked too polished, too young, too not for me. But that day, I stepped inside. The sales clerk greeted me like I mattered. She didn't look past me or ask who the dress was for. She asked simply, "What are you looking for?" And I said, "Something for me." She smiled, led me toward a rack near the window. That's when I saw it. A dress in a deep garnet red. Not wine, not burgundy, garnet. The kind of red that doesn't scream, it commands. I ran my fingers along the fabric. It was soft-structured and unapologetically bold. I took it into the fitting room, slipped it on. And for the first time in years, I didn't see someone's mother or someone's burden. I saw me. Strong, quiet, whole. When I stepped out, the clerk smiled and said, "That's the one." And I nodded. Yes, it is. I bought it, paid in full, didn't ask for a discount, didn't explain who I was or why I was buying it. This dress wasn't for a wedding, wasn't for a dinner party. It was for me. And when I got home, I hung it in my closet, centered, pressed, perfect. Not as a costume, not as a memory, as armor. Sometimes power isn't loud. It doesn't break things or burn bridges. Sometimes power is quiet. It's a line in a will rewritten with intention. A friendship honored. A red dress bought not for approval, but for truth. And in that silence, I finally found peace. Not the kind that comes from forgiveness, but the kind that comes from finally choosing yourself. Time is strange. It doesn't heal wounds the way people say, but it gives them space, room to breathe, to shift, to soften. And in that space, sometimes things bloom. Sometimes they rot. And sometimes they return. 2 years passed, seasons changed, holidays came and went. My phone stayed mostly silent. I kept living not loudly, but fully. I started learning how to cook just for me. I figured out how to use the timer on my phone camera. I found friends in unexpected places like Marion and the women from the book circle who remembered my stories better than my own son did. My home grew quieter, but my heart stronger. One Saturday afternoon, I was picking through strawberries at the local farmer's market when I ran into Linda, a woman I hadn't seen in months. The kind of woman who always wore sunglasses even indoors and had a secret she was dying to tell. She leaned in close, lowered her voice, like we were in some dramatic soap opera. "Did you hear?" she said, lips barely moving. I looked at her, eyebrows raised. "Claire." She left, moved out, took half the furniture. I didn't blink, just kept sorting through the fruit. She added, "Word as she told a friend at brunch that she should have listened to his mother. Said, get this, love doesn't come in boxes. You can't wear it like a costume." I smiled almost involuntarily, not because I was happy about their pain, but because the truth has a way of ripening. Sometimes it takes days, sometimes years, but it always finds its way to the surface. I didn't reach out, didn't gloat, didn't say I told you so. I'd let go of their story long ago. But stories, especially the ones we bury, have a way of circling back when you least expect them. A few weeks later, my phone rang. The name lit up the screen like it hadn't in years. Daniel. For a moment, I didn't move, just stared, as if the name itself were a ghost. Then I picked up. His voice was different, smaller, no edge, no defensiveness, just weariness, like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. "Mom," he said, just that. And suddenly I saw him, not the man in a tux, at a wedding I wasn't invited to, but the little boy in the back seat, asking if he could have extra fries. The one who drew me crayon cards that said, "You're the best cooker and the best hugger in the world." But I also remembered being erased. I remembered the silence, the lies, the message that said I'd ruin the aesthetic. He took a breath, then said, "I'm sorry. I should have never." I stopped him gently. "I forgave you long ago," I said. He paused like the weight of that sentence didn't land all at once, and then I added softer but firmer, "But forgiveness doesn't mean access." He didn't know what to say. I could hear it in the pause that followed, and I let him sit in that silence. Because some truths don't need to be yelled, they just need to land. He eventually asked if we could start over, if we could talk, maybe have dinner sometime. I told him kindly, I'm not angry anymore, but I've built a life that doesn't orbit around being chosen. And I'm not stepping back into a space where I'm only remembered when things fall apart. I meant every word. I wished him well, truly. And then I hung up. That evening I stood in front of the mirror, brushed my hair back, opened my closet. There it was, the red dress, still hanging, untouched, perfect. A quiet reminder of the day I chose myself. That dress wasn't bought for revenge or recognition. It was bought for truth. Because sometimes choosing yourself isn't a declaration. It's a quiet shift, a decision to walk away from conditional love and build something softer, fuller, and real. They say power looks like shouting, like slamming doors and raised voices. But I've learned that real power. It's knowing when to stay silent. It's answering the phone without letting it reopen the wound. It's wearing a red dress you bought for no one but yourself. It's forgiving without offering the key back. Because I don't live there anymore, in that space where love had strings. I built a new home for myself, one that doesn't collapse when someone forgets I exist. And when Daniel called me that day, he expected to find the woman who begged for a seat at his wedding. But instead, he found a woman who'd already reclaimed her place in the world, on her own terms. I didn't rewrite my will out of spite. I rewrote it out of self-respect. There's a difference. One is fueled by hurt, the other by healing. Sitting in Helen's office, pen in hand, I reviewed the final draft. No trace of Daniel's name, no mention of shared blood or forgotten birthdays. In his place, I wrote Marion, not just a neighbor, but a presence, a witness, a quiet friend who showed up when no one else did. I initialed each page, then signed the final one with a steady hand, and in that moment, I exhaled, not like someone letting go of bitterness, but like someone finally breathing freely after years of holding their breath. Later that night, I stood in front of the mirror. The red dress clung to me like a truth that had waited patiently to be claimed. No pearls, no flowers in my hair, just fabric and reflection. It didn't need to be seen by anyone else. I saw it. I saw me. This was never about revenge. It was never about making them hurt. Power for me wasn't in the note tucked in silk or the wedding I never attended. It was in the stillness after, the silence I chose, the boundaries I built. It was in waking up one day and realizing I didn't need to be part of their story to feel whole. Daniel called once more, his voice softer this time, careful. I listened, then said gently, I wish you well, but I'm not coming back to a life that only remembers me when it's falling apart. And I meant it, because here's the real twist: I was never a side character. Not in his story, not in anyone's. I've been writing my own all along. Now it's printed in ink, sealed in silk, and stitched in strength. And that is more than enough. Stories like Eleanor's aren't rare, they're just rarely told. In a world that celebrates youth image and perfection, we often forget the quiet power of the people who built everything behind the scenes. Mothers, caretakers, silent givers, they shape generations, yet are too easily cast aside when they no longer fit the aesthetic. But love is not about aesthetics. It is not curated, filtered, or disposable. Love is presence. It's hands that held you at your worst, meals cooked without thanks, rent paid without being asked. It is the quiet sacrifice no camera ever captures. And yet we live in a society that teaches us to value visibility over loyalty, public gestures over private consistency. That's why Eleanor's story cuts so deep, not because she was excluded from a wedding, but because she was erased from a life she helped build. We need to do better, not just as children, but as humans. We need to remember that legacy isn't what we post. It's who shows up for us in the dark when there's no applause. So here's my question to you. Who are the Eleanors in your life? And have you made space for them lately? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your stories, your regrets, your awakenings, your red dress moments, because maybe, just maybe, someone's watching and wondering if they still matter.